What focal length should you choose? How the heck are you supposed to know what focal length to use and when? Should you use a 35 or an 85? What focal lengths do the best DPs in the world use? Is there a most cinematic focal length? If there is, I bet you Danny Gevirtz knows it. When should you use a super wide angle lens? Spoiler, it's not just about lens distortion and making yourself look skinnier or fatter. Is this like a right and wrong thing, or is it all just personal preference? Questions will be answered in this video. But let's just be honest, I am making this video because I just got my own set of iron glass vintage lenses made into modern cinema glasses, and I just wanted to test them out. That is the reason why I'm making this video, but I do think this will be very informative for you. When it comes to choosing a focal length, the number one thing you should be thinking about is story, but I do think that there is also an element of style in your choices, which we'll definitely see when we look at the top DPs in the world and what focal lengths they like to use most. Let's start with the basics. Let's talk about how do you tell story with a focal length. For me, the main thing that I'm always thinking about is how do I want it to feel? For example, do I want it to feel intimate and like you're there with me, that sense of presence? Or do I want it to feel like somebody is on the outside looking in? For example, this is a 20 mil and it feels like you as the audience and me as the person making this video, we feel very close. It feels like there's this sense of presence, like you're in the room with me, probably right next, maybe a little bit uncomfortably close at the moment. Now this is a 28 mil. We still feel pretty close to each other, but there's definitely a little bit more distance now. Maybe that's a little bit more comfortable for both of us. Now we're at a 37 mil, which it looks very nice and cinematic, but there definitely feels like there's more of a gap between you and me. It feels like you are farther from me. The sense of presence is still there, but it's starting to be less than when we, for example, had 20 mil. Definitely way less than that. Don't get me wrong, this is still a very nice look. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. This is just the feeling that we're getting now. Notice also we're starting to get a lot more background blur and we're seeing less of the surroundings. It's just kind of me and a little bit of stuff around me. Now we're on the 58 mil. This is the Helios 442 incredible lens, made even better by Iron Glass. And this right away feels like you are like on the outside kind of looking in. There is no longer that sense of presence, or very little if we're gonna be honest. But the bokeh is incredible. It looks super cinematic to me in a lot of ways, but we are losing that sense of presence now. So the feeling of this lens has changed a lot, especially if we go back to some of those wider lenses. It's official, we are no longer in the same room. That's what it feels like. You guys are so far away now. There is a huge gap between us. There's zero sense of presence. It almost feels like you're not in the same room. And also very interesting, like this wall feels huge now. It's like a giant white wall. Even when I look back, it's like a tiny white wall in this frame. It looks like a giant white wall. We just got a white wall of nothingness back there now. But there is a lot of shallow depth of field, and I do pop a lot from the image. But if I'm making a YouTube video or whatever and I wanna, have this sense of presence, well, I ain't getting any here. Now we're on the 135 mil. I had to change the angle a little bit because I cannot get the camera so far. You are literally physically really far away from me. What does it feel like being in space? You're no longer on the same planet as me. There is zero sense of presence. You are not anywhere close to me. And this is feeling much more like I'm being spied on or something. So yeah, this feels very, very, very different. In the world of YouTube, I typically like to stay on the wider side of things. So right now I'm filming on a 20 mil, 28 would be great, 37 would be great. Once we start getting to the 58 mil and that like kind of 50 mil and above, it doesn't feel like you and me are hanging out anymore. And I really like that sense of presence. Like we're in the same room here, we're talking to each other. It's almost like you're there sitting across the table from me and I'm just talking to you. I always think back to the interview with Roger Deakins where he basically tells like the cameraman of the interview, like, why be on the outside when you can be on the inside and make it feel more intimate and have that sense of presence.
I've got a very strong feeling about lenses, and personally I'm sitting here talking to you and you're filming me from over there on a shoulder and probably a single, where I'd rarely do that because I think the camera was to me, I would shoot singles inside here, unless it's for a particular effect, and then I'd drop back off and be more observational with a shoulder in. I mean, I think it's a totally different effect to an audience looking at somebody on the end of a 100mm lens, as opposed to somebody that's being shot on a 27 close to, or 21. So here we are, 32mm or 30mm. It's on a zoom, so sometimes you can't tell what the millimeter is. Anyway, but it's different, right? There's a sense of presence. You're right there with somebody supposed to being. I think psychologically it's a totally different effect.
Roger Deakins, legend. But also you want to think about whose perspective are we in? So when I'm doing YouTube, it's in my perspective. That's why the camera stays with me and it feels right. But let's say I'm here and I'm looking way far out there at something or somebody. It wouldn't make sense for me then to jump the camera all the way over there because we're in my perspective. So then we would pull out something like the 135 and get a nice long focal length shot. And that would make it feel like, oh yeah, Matti is looking way far out there at that person. But if it's a movie and we have two characters and we're kind of in both of their perspectives and how they're relating to each other, then we would want to, have a 24mm filming this character and then jump all the way to where the other person is and get that same sort of shot, same sort of perspective from their point of view. I personally feel like it's weird if, for example, two people are talking to each other and you want it to feel really intimate, to be shooting it on like a 135mm. You're on the outside looking in. It just feels like they're being spied on, versus if you take, for example, this 28mm, and then you get a shot of both the characters talking to each other. Now it feels like they're in the same space, they're present with each other, which in turn makes it feel much more intimate. And also because we as the audience are close to those characters, we can kind of sense the intimacy more. But maybe you want that effect of some other character looking at the two people having this moment. That's when you would want to use something like the 85mm or 58mm or 135mm, and then it feels like, oh, that character is staring far out at them. And I just want to say, just because you're doing a close-up shot doesn't mean you have to use a long focal length like a 135. You can do a close-up with a 20mm like I'm using right now, or a 28. You can do wide close-ups. That's okay too, and that has a different feel. So it's not just like, oh, I want a tight shot, I need to use a 75mm or an 85mm. Oh, I want a wide shot, I'm going to use the 20mm. That is not how you should be thinking about focal lengths, because a close-up on a 135 will feel very, very different than a close-up on a 20mm. And again, that is the number one thing that I'm looking at, is what does it feel like? What does that focal length feel like when we, the audience, see through that perspective? There are also some like functional things that you can solve with focal length. So the wider the lens is, the more distance it'll feel like there is between you, the subject, and the background. It also makes the background look smaller, again, in comparison to your subject, which might be important depending on your location. It could also hurt you. Like if you have a really big building back there and you want to make sure it looks big, you probably don't want to be on a 20mm. We get less bokeh, so we don't get as much shallow depth of field out there as if we were using the 58mm, for example. And a lot of people are going to get mad with distortion and compression and all this. I don't care about any of that stuff. A wide angle will make it feel more distorted because you're closer to the lens, to the sensor, to the camera. Ignore all the people saying there is no such thing as distortion and compression. Sure, whatever. But the feeling and the look changes a lot. So that's the wide side. Once we start going on the longer, 50 and above focal lengths, that's when the compression, the background starts to feel a lot closer to you now. Now we're on the 58mm, and right away it feels like there's less distance between me and the background. The background feels bigger. That's again that like compression thing that a lot of people get confused about. Also way more background blur, way more bokeh. That's a really nice look. And we get less distortion, less of that like goofy face looking thing. But I also think it's really important to know, how do we as humans see our world? What's natural for us? What focal length are we seeing in? And I think there's some discrepancy, or like there's kind of a range of what you could say our eyes are seeing, and our eyes behave very weirdly. We can kind of see very wide, but also kind of zoom in a way. And so our eyes focal length is somewhere between a 24 mil and a 50 mil. So if we wanted to really feel like we're in the perspective of that character, a 24 mil could be an incredible focal length choice for you. And interestingly, actually, a great show, The Studio with Seth Rogen, they filmed the whole show on one focal length, and that is the 24 mil. Also happens to be my favorite focal length. Now, if you don't want it to feel like it's from that character's perspective, it would probably be better to be on like the 50 mil, maybe even more zoomed inside than going with something like the 24 or 35 mil. But I think on most projects, your main hero lens should be kind of somewhere in between a 24 and a 50 mil, just because that's how our eyes see. Once you start going past 50 mil, it feels very claustrophobic and very tight. And then if you go wider than 24, then it starts to feel very stylized. And that's not necessarily wrong, but you just have to know that that's what's gonna happen. And now would be a good time to look at some of the top DPs in the world and what focal lengths they most gravitate towards. Because like I said, there is a bit of an element of style here. Do you go on the 24 mil side or do you go on the 50 mil side? So let's look at the top DPs and what they're choosing. First off, we have Roger Deakins, incredible, one of my favorite cinematographers of all time. He has shot incredible movies, 1917 Skyfall, No Country for Old Men, great movies. He likes to use 32 mil and 40 mil the most. That's what he gravitates towards, and that makes a lot of sense for his style. It's not so like super wide in the perspective of the character, but it's also not like narrow and claustrophobic. So that makes a lot of sense. That probably also explains a lot why I like his cinematography. Again, he likes that intimacy, and so he likes to feel like there's that sense of presence between the audience and the character. Greg Fraser, probably maybe the best DP in the world right now, shot things like Dune, Batman, incredible movies. He gravitates towards 35 mil, 40, and 50 mil. So he's kind of using the whole range, but more so avoids the wider side of things. Robert Richardson shot things like Aviator, Django Unchained, Kill Bill. He likes to go real wide, so 18 to 21 mil, 27 to 40. Again, he's kind of doing the full range, but definitely likes to stay on like the wider side of things. Then we have Emmanuel Lubezki, Chivo, one of the greatest ever. He's shot incredible stuff like The Revenant, Gravity, Birdman. He likes to stay way on the wide side of things. So he gravitates towards 14 mil, 18 mil, 21, 27, all very wide, which like you look at Revenant or any of his work and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. And that is a very like stylistic personal preference. He clearly likes to see the world from that perspective and likes the feeling that that gives. You know, if you saw a Chivo movie and it was a bunch of 85 and 50 mil, it just wouldn't look like a movie shot by Chivo. Hoyte van Hoytema, Oppenheimer, Interstellar, Her. What a list of movies that he shot. 40 mil, 50 mil, 65 mil. I think that's IMAX, so that like translates to pretty wide lenses actually. Like 65 mil sounds like, wow, he really prefers those long lenses. No, that's on an IMAX. So Spencer, can you do the calculation? What would a 65 mil be on an IMAX camera? Because my guess is it's actually quite wide, probably like closer to like a 35 or something. Pretty much everybody stays within that like 24 to 50 mil range as their like favorite hero lens, the lens that they use the most often. I think it's wrong to say choosing the focal length is always a choice of story. I think for the most part, it is a lot of story, but there is also a heavy style factor involved. And some of us just prefer, you know, like for example, me, I prefer 24 mils or in that, you know, 24 to 35 mil. And then others will absolutely hate that and they gravitate towards like a 35 to 50 mil. That's how they love to see the world and that's how they love to make movies. And then you have the crazy surrealism of like a Chivo, which is like super wide, which I also actually do like a lot. But that is clearly a stylistic choice that he enjoys in his cinematography. So are there wrong and right choices when it comes to focal length? Well, kind of, yeah. I think if you're making decisions that work against your story or against what you're trying to say, then that's the wrong decision. And like I said, I think most of the time our hero lens should be around the 24 to 50 mil mark. There's always gonna be exceptions, but again, there is a heavy style factor on which side of the spectrum do you sit on. I don't know, do what you want. I love these lenses, they're incredible. Thank you, Iron Glass, for making them. I appreciate you guys. All right, bye guys. Oh, hi there in space. We're not close at all. We are not connecting right now. Yeah, I don't like this. I wanna come back close to you guys.